Hi everyone. A brief summary for Chapter 2, Applied Behavior Analysis, second edition. So Chapter 2 speaks about behavior, and the best definition of behavior was by Johnston and Pennypacker in 1980. It says the behavior of an organism is that portion of an organism's interaction with its environment that is characterized by deductible displacement in space through time of some part of the organism, and that results in a measurable change in at least one aspect of the environment. So basically, there should be some interaction between the environment and the individual for behavior to occur, or for us to call it a behavior. So for example, if you're walking in the street and it's raining and you got wet, getting wet is not a behavior, even though there's some interaction between the environment and yourself as a human. It's not a behavior because you did not do anything, and there, as you can see, there's no displacement in space or time of some part of you did not do anything to get wet. So basically the interaction has to be between the environment and something you do. Walking in the rain is a behavior, but getting wet is not a behavior. So it's we can think about it it's mentioned in the book, the dead man's test. If a dead man can do it, then it's not a behavior. If a dead man is in the street while it's raining and he gets wet, then yes, it's not a behavior. If the dead man can sleep, can fall, a lot of things that can happen to him can be carried. These are all not behaviors. So again, it has to be measurable, and you have to be able to observe it, and it has to pass the dead man's test. Then they talk about the environment, and they talk about the environment, basically what happens around the behavior. So what happens before the behavior, which is called an antecedent, and then what happened after the behavior, which is a consequence. And then they speak about respondent behavior. So there are types of behaviors. Respondent behavior is basically something you don't really learn. So for example, if there's a lot of wind, your eye may blink. If you exercise, your heartbeat may change, may increase. If you have food in your mouth, you may salivate, or you will salivate. So these are the behaviors that are respondent. It happens without a history of any learning. It's more, we can call it the human nature, or biological reactions. So how does respondent conditioning happen? Of course, we heard about that in 1849, Pavlov and his dog and the bell. So basically what happened is that every time Pavlov was providing food, he would ring a bell before the food comes, and he found out that his dog will start salivating only by hearing the bell, without any food present in front of the dog. So basically he concluded that you can do conditioning, respondent conditioning, and what we do is that you get an unconditioned stimulus, like an air puff, and an unconditioned response. So usually if there's an air puff, the eye blinks, and then you get a neutral stimulus, such as like a sound, a click sound, and you pair it with the unconditioned stimulus, which is the air puff, and then you would get an eye blink. And if you do this few times, then the conditioning happens. And then what happens after is that if you only present the conditioned stimulus, which is the click of the click sound, then you have the eye blink. So there's a way to condition these biological reactions or respondent behaviors by pairing a neutral stimulus to an unconditioned stimulus, such as the bell and the food with the dog, and this example also that was mentioned in the chapter. Then we have operant behavior, which is of course came up by B.F. Skinner in 1969. And operant conditioning occurs automatically, so the individual doesn't need to know that he's being conditioned for him to get conditioned, or the behavior to get conditioned. So it could happen without the individual awareness. And usually immediate consequence has the greatest effect. So if you're trying to condition a behavior by giving a consequence to increase it in the future or to maintain it in the future, your consequence or reinforcement has to be immediate. So what is reinforcement? There's positive reinforcement and there's negative reinforcement. A lot of people get confused between negative reinforcement and punishment. And as you can see, the two arrows are going up because both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement increases the behavior. They increase the behavior in the future. So positive reinforcement is basically something that you add to the environment right after the behavior. And if this behavior increases in the future, then we can call it what we did positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is something that you remove from the environment after the behavior happens, and it increases the behavior in the future. So if the behavior increases in the future, we know now that what we did after the behavior is considered a negative reinforcement. Let me give you some examples. So positive reinforcement, if a teacher asks a student to answer a question and he does answer a question and then she give him praise saying excellent job, and then you see the student raising his hand again in the future answering the question, so that means what the teacher did, the praise she gave him is considered positive reinforcement. She added something to his environment that was not there before, so the behavior of raising the hand or answering questions will likely happen again in the future. A negative reinforcement is again something you remove from the environment. So for example, if a kid hears a very loud sound and screams, and as a result of his screaming, you close the door to eliminate the sound, what may happen in the future is that the student may scream every time he hears a sound, because when he screamed before, something happened in the environment to remove the noise. Whatever you did was closing the door, and the consequence is basically reducing the sound, eliminating the sound. So screaming is a behavior here that will be maintained or increased in the future every time this kid or student hears a loud sound. That's why it's negative, because it's removal of something from the environment right after the behavior. Okay, so these are the two kinds of reinforcement, and reinforcement is something that always increases the behavior in the future. Then we have punishment, and there's also positive punishment and negative punishment. Punishment always decreases the behavior in the future. So positive punishment is, again, you add something to the environment right after the behavior, and it punishes the behavior by reducing it in the future. And again, we don't know if it's punishment until we try it and we do see a decrease in the behavior. Negative punishment is something that you remove from the environment, and then the behavior is punished, so in the future it will happen less. Positive punishment because something was added to your environment, which is a ticket that you have to pay. Negative punishment could be a parent taking a kid's favorite toy from him when he screams, so that now the behavior of screaming may decrease in the future because this toy was taken away from his environment. Okay, so these are the two kinds, and again, punishment always decreases the behavior in the future. Never maintains it, never increase it. Then they talk about unconditioned reinforcer. So it's the things that we need, and it usually works as a reinforcer without conditioning it. So food is something that we really need as humans, so it usually increases the future behavior without the need for a learned history of reinforcement or pairing reinforcement with food. However, we have to also consider the motivation operation. So for example, if you're deprived of food for a very long time, and then you're being reinforced by food, yes, the behavior that's reinforced by food will increase in the future, because food deprivation can increase the value of food as a reinforcer, and food satiation can decrease the value of food as a reinforcer. So food satiation is basically when you just ate a big meal and somebody comes after that and reinforce you using food. You're not going to be interested in the reinforcer because you just had a big meal and you're full, and this reinforcer doesn't really have a value at this point. So this is a motivation operation. It can be it can cause you to do the behavior or not do it based on the antecedent or what just happened in your environment, and caused you to be either in need of food or not in need of food. Unconditioned punisher increase future behavior without the need of history. So pain is considered an unconditioned punisher, especially pain that can cause tissue damage in most cases. So, if a person does a behavior and as a consequence he's hurt or he's in pain, it's going to function as a punisher in the future, so this behavior may not happen so much, or it will definitely decrease. Conditioned enforcers and punishers are the stimulus that were paired by other enforcers and punishers. So pairing, we're talking about pairing here. And because no two people experience the world in exactly the same way, the roster of events that can serve as conditioned enforcers and punishers at any particular time is idiosyncratic to each individual and always changing. So we have to really consider that if you use one enforcer with one person, that doesn't mean that this other person will also benefit from the same enforcer, because it might not work as an enforcer. As we said, enforcement is considered enforcement only after we see the change in the behavior. And that's why we have to assess and we have to figure out if the item you're providing or the changes you're doing in the environment will be considered a reinforcement. Also, people change over time. So maybe when I was younger, candy and stickers were considered the highest reinforcements. But now maybe, going out with friends or getting an award is my reinforcement, and I really don't care about stickers and candy anymore. So we change, that's why you have to keep assessing the individual you're working with to see if the enforcement has changed, if there's better enforcements that you can use, and so forth. And that's why we cannot predetermine enforcer or punisher before seeing stimulus future effect on a behavior. Discriminated operant and three-term contingency. So enforcement selects not just forms of behavior but environmental condition as well. So sometimes, in some places, behaviors may happen more often than other places because of many reasons, something called stimulus control. So if it happens much more under one condition, that's what it means. If it happens much more under one condition and less in its absence, then there's a stimulus control. For example, if grandma provides you with chocolate every time you ask for it, however, when you ask your mom for chocolate, you don't get anything, your behavior of asking for chocolate will increase in the presence of your grandma and will not increase or might not happen in the presence of your mom. That's an example. Another example, if you're with a math teacher versus a science teacher, if in math class you ask to go out and you're permitted to go outside the classroom versus in the science class you're not allowed to go out, your request for going outside of class will most likely increase during math class and during the presence of the math teacher. So this is what we call stimulus control, and the person or the condition that signals the presence of the enforcer is called as discriminative stimulus. So when you see your grandma, you do ask for chocolate, so your grandma becomes a discriminative stimulus. Also, for example, if the phone rings, you answer the phone. If there's no ringing, then there's no answering. So the behavior of answering will not happen unless there is an SD, the discriminative stimulus, which is a phone ringing. And then you get the enforcement, which is maybe social attention by talking to somebody on the phone or someone you like. Now, there's a three-term contingency, the ABC, antecedent, behavior, consequence. So Skinner said behavior, human or otherwise, remains an extremely difficult subject matter. Why? Why is it difficult to study human behaviors? First of all, is the complexity of human repertoire. Human can learn so much, there can be chain of effects and contingency adoption. So you can think about it, maybe you're looking for something you lost and then you find a recipe that you had years ago, and then you end up calling somebody who was asking for the recipe, and then he gives you another recipe, and then you cook something. So it becomes a chain of events, and it's not just a very simple way when we study behaviors or the antecedent, the consequence of behavior when it comes to, chains of effects or chains of behaviors. Also, you can learn one thing in isolation and then learn another thing in isolation and then a third thing, and then you use them all together to apply them to a fourth thing that you didn't really get a chance to learn, or no one taught it to you, but you use whatever you know to figure out the fourth part or area. And we see that in mathematics a lot, as they mentioned in the chapter. So human repertoire is a complex area, and that's why it's sometimes hard or difficult to study behaviors. Also, complexity of controlling variables. It could be hard to control the environment to study behaviors sometimes. Response may be a function of more than one stimulus, and one stimulus may be an effect or can affect more than one response. Or it could be also a problem due to limited resources that impact you and affect your way of understanding the environment and controlling the environment, and that's why it could be a struggle, and it would be hard for you to create an effective behavior change program, as an example. Also, individual differences. Cultures can impact humans in similar ways, but each one of us is different. So differences in human also make it very difficult to understand behaviors in general, because then it's not a general thing you need to study. It's a very individualistic thing because everyone is different. Even though if we are all from one culture, we have differences, individual differences, and also we have unique conditions. Some of us have hearing loss, vision impairment, cerebral palsy, and these can make us even more unique and with different needs and individualistic differences. So applied behavior analysis could be a challenging task. However, few tasks are rewarding or important for the betterment of humankind, and this is how they end this chapter 2. This is again a very brief summary, very quick summary of my own understanding to chapter 2 from Cooper book, Applied Behavior Analysis. Thank you.